Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, has tracked the route of the Ukrainian counter-offensive from Izium toward Liman, stopping in the villages of Yatskivka and Svyatogirsk along the way. She joins us now live from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Lindsay.
Matt, the Ukrainians, as you say, are on a roll, and they think that they are pretty much unstoppable at the moment. And you know, it's not just the Ukrainians saying that. They took about 14 villages today in Kherson, and the Russian Ministry of Defense has already been forced to update its maps. A Russian war correspondent traveling with Russian forces said the situation in the south is critical in terms of manpower and intelligence. The enemy is far ahead of us. Do not expect any good news soon. Meanwhile, in the north, the town of Liman, this is a transport hub, there are Russian bodies there, Russian forces who are being pulled out of the rubble by the Ukrainian troops as they take hold of that town. We don't know how many Russians were killed, nor how many have been taken prisoner. What we do know, and I've heard this from Ukrainian soldiers myself, is that they're putting up a diminishing amount of resistance. But what is the cost of this? The destruction, it's just breathtaking. It's terrible. And that most of it is being paid by poor people, poor and old people who had very little, and now they have nothing. And this is what we have seen as we've been driving around the battle zone.
Once these were villages where little happened to disturb the cycle of the seasons. Now all that remains is ruins. For this was the road along which the Ukrainians shelled and pursued Russian forces towards Liman and beyond. At Yatskivka, the autumn rain has beaten the tracks of Russian tanks into the mud, a mire into which Russia's military ambitions are sinking. A Russian artillery gun lies at the roadside. How terrifying it must have been for the few civilians who remained and were caught in the middle of the artillery duel. Now they're collecting humanitarian aid, trying to work out how they'll get through the winter. Jubilant Ukrainian soldiers say that all they see of the Russian troops is their bodies or their backs.
Вони вже біжать. Біжать тільки, я не знаю, де вони зупиняться, чи на границі Росії, чи в Москві, один Бог знає. Але як будуть бігти вони? Вони так біжать, що ми їх не можемо догнати. Як ми можемо воювати, як вони втікають?
The Church of Faith, Love and Hope at Svyatogirsk hadn't been completed before it was destroyed. It's hard to know if it was hit by Russian shelling when Ukrainians controlled the town, Ukrainian shelling during the months of Russian occupation, or both.
The dome and the cross must have fallen from the top of the church when it was under fire. Everything around here is in ruins. Everything in this town, everything along the road we've just travelled. Houses, apartment blocks, schools, entire villages, utterly destroyed. People's lives in ruins.
Someone's collected shrapnel. They sleep in the crypt below. When the Russians were here, they had no idea what was happening beyond the town because there was no internet, no mobile signal.
И страху много. Много страху. А еще больше лжи. А еще больше лжи. Зашкал.
So how do they survive?
Да вот так вот вместе. В одиночку тяжело, а вместе легче. Поэтому мы сюда все пришли.
The 5,000 residents of Svyatogirsk would have prayed here, but most fled, leaving only about 100 souls and a church full of icons meant to help the faithful focus their minds on prayer and connect them to God. Prayers did nothing for those who lived in this apartment block. 4 died and 10 were injured when it was hit 10 days ago, just after the Ukrainians retook the town.
Мы сидели дома, и в один прекрасный момент дом начал шататься, и произошел сильный взрыв. Мы сразу побежали в подвал, людей с этого подъезда начали спасать, эвакуировать, потому что завалило и не могли вылезти. Был парализованный мужчина на 3-м этаже, его с балкона солдаты снимали.
How do you stay sane? Maybe by sticking to your daily beauty routine to face a terrifying world on your own terms.
Да, ну, в принципе, что сложного, хочется хоть в такое время красиво выглядеть, хоть как-то стресс снять. Я так расслабляюсь.
The building the Russians used as a base has been trashed. Some Ukrainian soldiers moved in, while others continue to chase the Russians up the road to Liman.
Сильного опору тут не було. Тут лишилася група, прикривала відхід, але ось колону, яку вони збирали, розбили артилерію. Тобто далі вони вибиралися, не знаю, можливо, пішки.
Ukrainian forces destroyed the bridge over the Siversky Donets River, which runs through the town, to impede the Russian escape. On the other side looms the Svyatogorsky cave monastery, as it has done since the 17th century. Generations of monks have seen war and peace come and go. The monks are loyal to the Moscow Patriarch. The Ukrainians suspect they're hiding Russian soldiers in the catacombs, taking sanctuary from a Ukrainian advance that shows no sign of slackening.
Lindsay Hilsum there. Her report was filmed and edited by Soren Munk and produced by Rob Hodge. And if you want to access a dubbed version of her report rather than the subtitled one, it can be found on our website, channel4.com/news. Well, earlier I spoke to Councillor Derek Chollet, a senior policy advisor at the State Department who works closely with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He is set to travel to the UK tomorrow for meetings with government officials to discuss ongoing cooperation on a range of security and defence issues, especially about Ukraine. I started by asking him what US intelligence could tell us about Vladimir Putin's intentions when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons.
Well, I don't want to speculate on what his intentions are, but what I can say is the loose talk we have heard over the last several weeks and indeed months about the use of nuclear weapons, it's irresponsible, it's unacceptable, it's dangerous. Earlier this year, Russia, along with other members of the UN Security Council, signed on to a statement to say nuclear war should never be fought because it can never be won. And we have told the Russians in no uncertain terms, both publicly and privately, that there would be severe consequences if Russia were to break this taboo and use a nuclear weapon. It'd be devastating, first and foremost, for the people of Ukraine. It would be also devastating for Russia. That's why Vladimir Putin needs to stop this loose talk.
You call it loose talk, but are you taking the loose talk seriously?
Of course, we take this very seriously, and it's something we're watching very closely. We have not seen any signs that Russia is preparing for the use of nuclear weapons, but it's something we're remaining very vigilant about and watching very closely.
So when there are reports, some of them confirmed, some of them unconfirmed out there, of a nuclear test in the Arctic, underwater, or a train approaching the front line with some nuclear material on it, is that the Russians, trying to prove to us that their words, are serious? In other words, we are not bluffing. Is it false information? Do you have any confirmation of it?
Well, as I said, there's been no shortage of false information and disinformation being perpetrated by the Russians, perpetuated by the Russians in the last several months.
When he gave his speech in the Kremlin last week, Vladimir Putin, it wasn't so much about the annexation of Donbass. It was really about how much he hates the West. And we've heard elements of this before, but this seemed to be new. It seemed to be a purer form of bile.
Well, anyone who's been following what Vladimir Putin's been saying over the last several months and indeed years wouldn't have been surprised by anything he said in that ceremony he put on last week to celebrate an illegal and unjust annexation of Ukrainian territory. What matters the most, though, is what we're doing to support Ukraine and frankly, the gains Ukraine is making on the battlefield, just including in the last 24 hours.
And of course, one of the reasons why they're able to make these gains is because of some very powerful weapons that you, the Americans and others, have sent them. Now, if you listen to to Russian officials and the Russian media, they're already talking as if they're at war with us, with the West, with NATO, because of those weapons.
What we're focused on is what we're doing to help the Ukrainians. I don't want to get into the Russians' heads and how they're thinking about things. What I can tell you is that they invaded Ukraine. They invaded an innocent country, a victim on their border. We, the United States, working with our allies and partners, and right now there's around 50 countries around the world who are providing some sort of assistance to Ukraine. The United States is providing now north of $17 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. That's more than triple Ukraine's defense budget from last year. And other allies and partners are as well. Our colleagues in the United Kingdom are also really leading in this effort.
But do you think that we can carry on walking this very fine dividing line between sending them weapons but not sending them NATO troops?
Well, we've been very clear, the United States has been very clear, we're not looking for a direct confrontation with Russia, and we're not on the ground in any way. That said, we are prepared, and we have shown that we're going to do whatever it takes to help support Ukraine gain its independence.
If, for some reason, Vladimir Putin were to be removed from power, are you afraid that what replaces him might be even worse?
Well, again, I don't want to engage in any hypotheticals about the Russian leadership. What I can say is what the United States stands for, and I think what our allies like the United Kingdom and many democratic partners around the world stand for, is for a Russian society, a Russian people that can speak out, that can raise their voices and also vote for their own destiny.
And very briefly, is this the most dangerous of the conflict so far, as he seems to be losing on the battlefield, but his rhetoric is being ramped up?
Oh, I can't put a marker whether this moment is more dangerous than 8 months ago when Russian forces were on the outskirts of Kiev. This war is by definition dangerous. It's risky. There are unintended consequences. That's why this war needs to end today. That's why Vladimir Putin needs to end this war.
Derek Scholler, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.